Good morning, young ladies and lads. It's another rainy day, right? So today we're going to talk about the remaining part of Chapter 8, the rules on exceptions. Let's first recall what are the two requirements, or we say how many steps are there to determine whether a measure can be justified under Article 20 of GATT 1994. Article 20 of GATT 1994. There are two steps, two requirements, right? The first one would be whether this measure can provisionally be justified under one of the specific justification grounds listed in paragraphs A to J of Article 20. A to J. Justified. The measure can be justified under these paragraphs. Can be justified. But this is just step one. Step two is whether the application of this measure meets the requirements of the SHAPO. SHAPO. The application of the measure meets the requirements provided for in the SHAPO. Then what's the SHAPO about? Also two, right? Also two requirements. What's it about? The application of the measure. No, not the SHAPO about two, but the first one. There are two requirements for a measure to meet the requirement, for a measure to meet this article. Okay. The first one is the measure is designed to protect the objectives in Article A to J. Designed to means, in Chinese, it means 目的是 to protect the objectives, the policy objectives listed in these articles. And the second requirement would be The second would be what? The second element of Article 2028 test, namely the measure is necessary to protect public morals. Necessary. Necessary to protect. Step 1, designed to protect. Step 2, necessary to protect. Okay? These are the requirements. Okay. Then let's talk in detail about the second requirement. The second requirement. As you can see, it's here. So what is the second element of the Article 20A test? What's Article 20A about? About what's the policy objective of Article 20A? To protect public morals. Do you remember that? Public morals. Public morals. This is what Article 20A for, to protect public morals. And this is the policy objective. So the second element of Article 20A test is the measure is necessary to protect public morals. Then, what is the key point to meet the necessary element? Key point. Key point here. It's important to know that the question is not blah, blah, blah. The question is only blah, blah, blah. This is the key point. I will not further elaborate it. I would just like to invite your attention to this. Draw your attention to this important question. Okay, that's the key point to meet the necessary element. Necessary element. Next question is the determination of whether a measure is necessary. In the determination of whether a measure is necessary, what are the three factors to be weighed and balanced against? Three factors to be weighed and balanced against. These are the three factors. You also need to know that. Okay. There is a last important question. It's about how to determine the extent to which the measure at issue contributes to the protection of the value at stake. How to determine the extent. How to determine the extent to which the measure at issue contributes to the protection of the value at stake. I think the words in red here can well explain the question. I will read it for you. Listen carefully. The more important the societal value protected, for example, public morals, by the measure at issue, the more it contributes to its objective, which means the public morals is that important, too important. Then we can say the more it contributes to its objective to protect the public morals. Second sentence, and the less trade restrictive the measure. The goal, the objective is only too important. And the measure, the less trade restrictive the measure is. But the measure you adopted is less trade restrictive. Then the easier the measure at issue may be considered to be necessary. So there are two elements: objective. The more important, then the more it contributes to the objective. And the second is trade restrictive. Less trade restrictive, then the easier may be considered to be necessary. That's the key point to determine the extent of whether a measure is necessary. Okay. Okay. I think this may be the most difficult part for the overall content of this semester. So you'd better review the content in Chinese after class, okay? Especially, you need to pay more attention to the words in right here. Let's move on to next page. And also, this paragraph is rather important. A preliminary conclusion. Whether the measure is necessary, we need to first come to a preliminary conclusion. How to come to a preliminary conclusion that the measure at issue is necessary to protect public morals? Look here. Just now I mentioned less trade restrictive, right? More important, less trade effective. There must be two measures to be compared, right? Two measures to be compared. Then, how to come to a preliminary conclusion? The measure is necessary, must be confirmed by comparing the measure at issue with alternative measures. what does alternative measures mean? For example, the country adopted a measure A. That's the measure adopted by the respondent country. And there must be an alternative measure B. We will compare these two measures, compare them. Which one is less trade restrictive? Which one is less trade restrictive? I'll give you an example. For example, this is the measure taken by the respondent. If this alternative measure, B, is less restrictive, then is measure A necessary? Yes or no? It's a test whether you understood it or not. Again, this is the measure A. The measure adopted by the respondent. And B is an alternative to measure A. Then the point is, measure B is less trade restrictive than measure A. Then, is measure A necessary to protect the objective? No, very good. Because it is less restrictive. So, the respondent should adopt measure B instead of measure A, right? Good, very good. It's not that difficult as long as you review it. Review the Chinese version after class, okay? Then, next question would be, who should put forward the measure B? This measure B is put forward by which party? The respondent or the complainant? Who put forward this alternative measure B? Who? The complaining member or the complainant, yes. Because you are the plaintiff, right? You could always put forward an alternative to prove that the measure adopted by the respondent is not necessary. So I'm the plaintiff, I'm the complainant. I will put forward an alternative measure B. Then, who should bear the burden of proof? Who should bear the, yes, which party? The, whoever asserts a fact bears the burden of proof. I'll tell you, that principle does not apply here. Okay. After the complainant put forward the alternative measure B, then it's up to the respondent to prove that measure B is not less restrictive. So the respondent needs to show that the alternative measure identified by the complainant is not reasonably available, is not less trade restrictive, and provides a lesser contribution to the achievement of the measure's objective. Okay. Here, reasonably available, not less trade restrictive, and or provides a lesser contribution to the achievement of the measure's objective. Good. That would be everything for the requirements to be met in the application of Article 20. Rather complicated, but rather important. Then, let's look at the other paragraphs of Article 20. What's Article 20b about? To protect the life or health of humans, animals, or plants. And what's Article, where's the C? Let's just skip it, okay, because it appeared subsequently. Let's first look at Article 20d. What's Article 20d about? To secure compliance with the national laws or regulations. There's one precondition. My question is, are these national laws or regulations GATT consistent or inconsistent? What's your point?
Consistent.
Very good. Consistent. How? Because, look, not GATT inconsistent. That means it's GATT consistent. Which means the national laws or regulations must first is lawful, is consistent with the GATT. Otherwise, you cannot invoke Article 20d, okay? Good. Then let's move on to look at other objectives. Article 20g is about what? For the protection of the environment. Okay. For the conservation. Actually, conservation equals to protection. It is used in the context of the environment. Conservation equals to protection. Okay. Then, Article 20J is about to address the acquisition or distribution of products in general or local short supply. Okay. And look here, other paragraphs. From A to J, how many in total?
10.
Yes, good. 10 paragraphs. But in this PPT, there are only 8 discussed. There are still 2 remaining that which are not discussed. But you can always review the instrument of GATT. You can always review the instrument of GATT. 1994, Article 20. Okay. Other paragraphs. Let's look at C. What's C about? 20C is about gold and silver. Importation or exportation of gold and silver. Then Article 20E is about products of prison labor. Article 20F is about national treasures. 国家宝藏. These are all important societal values, from public morals to environment protection to protection of national treasures. These important societal values are in contradiction with which value? Which value? What we are learning? We're learning trade law, WTO law, right? So the key value of WTO law is what? Yes, good. Then use another word. Trade what? Yeah, trade what? Yeah. Freer trade means trade liberalization. Freer trade is something more oral expression, right? But this trade liberalization is more academic and written English. Trade liberalization. Okay. So we have already resolved the conflict between trade liberalization and all these other important societal values. Okay, good. Then let's move on to the chapeau of Article 20. This part, chapeau part. Chapeau part. What's the chapeau part about? The application, which means the process of taking the measure. The application of the measure, the process of taking the measure, does not constitute what? What's the requirement of the chapeau? The application of the measure does not constitute what? Look here. 1. Arbitrary or unjustifiable discrimination. Discrimination means different. Yes. And does not constitute a disguised restriction on international trade. In Chinese, it's like this. 任意或不合理的歧视，变相贸易限制。Which means the process of taking the measure, the application of the measure, does not constitute this 1, 2. Discrimination, disguised restriction on trade. That's the chapeau. That's what the chapeau about. Then let's go a little bit further into the details of these two requirements. Okay. So how to understand the discrimination? Discrimination. Is it similar to the non-discrimination principle? Think about it. Somewhat similar. Because both of them are related to discrimination, right? But different. What's the key point of discrimination? Whether the two measures are treated equally. That's too abstract, right? Anyway, I will try to explain them clearly. How can the application of a measure be found to constitute unjustifiable discrimination if the discrimination should have been foreseen and was not merely inadvertent or unavoidable? Yeah, this is a case. Look here. If the discrimination should have been foreseen and was not merely inadvertent or unavoidable, it would constitute unjustifiable discrimination. Another question. How to determine whether a discrimination is arbitrary or unjustifiable? 任意的或者不合理的歧视呢？ Within the meaning of the chapel of Article 20 of GATT 1994. Here, the answer lies here. The main question is then whether the discrimination can be reconciled with or is rationally related to the policy objective. For example, there is a discrimination. How to determine whether the discrimination is arbitrary or unjustifiable. Arbitrary, unjustifiable discrimination. How to determine the meaning of these two words? The question is like here. The main question is then whether the discrimination can be reconciled with or rationally related to the policy objective. Too abstract. So you'd better to go into the details of this case. Look, this case is rather important. You need to review it. Review the Chinese version of this part. The case is called EC, European Communities the respondent. The subject matter is seal products. Seal is an animal, not a stamp. It's an animal products. I'll give you an explanation in my own words. Okay, I will try to explain this case. EU is a developed economy. Its citizens value public morals very much. The EU likes to protect public morals, including the welfare of seals, which means these seals, the citizens of the EU cannot bear that the seals are killed or hunted by everybody. They cannot bear this. But there are those businessmen who would like to kill seals and sell the meat to EU. Okay? They like to kill the seals and sell to EU. The EU adopts a measure to prohibit the killing of seals. To prohibit the killing of seals. What's the measure? The ban of import of seals meat. There is a ban. This is the measure, okay? This is the measure. But with an exception. Why? Because there are those indigenous people, Inuits. Have you ever heard about that? Inuits. The Inuits, just like the crazy 疯狂原始人怎么说 What man? Older. Look for the words. Primitive. Primitive. Crazy primitive. Yeah. Inuits. The Inuits depend. Their lives depend on the hands of the seals. Right? So, the interests of the Inuits need to be protected. So there is an exception. It means all those seals hunted by Inuits can be imported to the EU. The ban, there is an exception. And in this context, can the policy objective of protecting public morals be realized? It's very difficult, right? Because it's hard to distinguish between the seals hunted by Inuits and those hunted by businessmen. It's rather difficult to distinguish the two, right? So we can say the public morals are hard to be fulfilled, to be realized. So is this ban necessary to protect public morals? I'm afraid not. But the point is not here. The point is, what does arbitrary and unjustifiable mean? Because, this exception, there are different two yin notes. There are two different yin notes. We've got Canadian yin notes. And we've also got what? Greenlandic. Greenlandic. What's this? This is Canadian. This is Greenlandic, 格陵兰. There are two different groups of yin notes. But, you know what? The EU's measure discriminates between Canadian yin notes and the Greenlandic yin notes. So we say this measure is arbitrary and unjustifiable. The measure constitutes arbitrary and unjustifiable discrimination. Look, because both types of hunts seriously affected seal welfare, which means those by yin notes and those by businessmen, both types of hunts seriously affected seal welfare. And about the Greenlandic yin notes and what here? Oh, not this case, also this case. Greenlandic, Greenland, and Canadian, Canada. Okay. That's why we say the measure constitutes arbitrary and unjustifiable discrimination. It's a little bit complex. You'd better review it after class. Let's take a break of 5 minutes. We'll come back later.